Joining us now, the president of American Action Forum, former Congressional Budget Office Director and former advisor to John McCain's presidential campaign, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, is with us. Doug, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tell us your reaction to the budget passed last night.
This is a great first step, but it is really just that, a first step. You got to have the House and Senate now get together on identical budgets, pass those in the House and Senate, then get to the actual business of writing and passing the tax reform itself.
What about the critics in terms of saying that it is adding, obviously, to the debt, the $1.5 trillion in tax cuts? That
in and of itself is not good news. The question is, can you get a really good pro-growth tax reform as a result? If so, it'll be worth it. And the proof's in the pudding, so we've got to see this bill. You
know, General, the president has been very clear in terms of wanting to build up the military. But, you know, the critics say, where does the money come from?
Yeah, listen, the budget resolution they just passed is a good thing. They got an amendment in there so they don't have to go to conference. The House can vote on this bill. But here's the challenge. If they don't remove the budget caps, so the so-called Budget Control Act, the $640 billion that's sitting in this budget, which is the base budget, it goes back to $549. And at $549, you cannot rebuild the military at all. We actually go into decline. That is the risk, and that is something maybe you can discuss with the president.
Okay, so when would they address these budget caps then? I mean, we got the vote last night. Give us your timeline.
They're supposed to wrap all of this up by the end of the year, and that's when they have to address it. And it'd be likely be addressed by the appropriations committees. The one on defense has got to address it.
John, your thoughts?
Well, you know, there's been so much focus on the tax element of this budget. I think people haven't been talking as much about the military piece. On the tax piece, Doug and I were talking in the green room beforehand about how important the corporate side, the business side of this tax reform is for the American economy. You know, the individual tax side has gotten so much attention. Democrats are saying they are tax cuts for the wealthy. The president is saying he wants to cut taxes for the middle class. There's this whole class issue, but what really matters for the economy is getting the business side of this tax reform down, getting corporate rates down, and getting what we call pass-through rates down to 20–25%.
The common element between the defense side and the tax side is that the status quo is dangerous for America. I mean, we really can't stay with the defense budgets we have. We're seeing a complete lack of preparedness. We see these awful accidents in the Navy, in the Pacific. That's got to change. On the tax front, if you look at the data for 2016, the real income increase for people who worked full year, full time was 0. That's just unacceptable. So the most important thing for the middle class is to get tax reform, and what's most important about it is not what's on the paper, it's the stuff that John's talking about. The kinds of incentives to give businesses to invest in America, hire in America, innovate in America, and get productivity and real wages growing. Yeah. That's what's at stake.
And that's what we've been talking about all year, Dagan. I mean, is this good news from your standpoint? We've been waiting for the Senate to pass this. Here we have it, and it looks like an open road to tax reform, but obviously this is just the first step.
It is a very good first step. The only Republican not to vote for this was Senator Rand Paul. So you had the vast majority of the Republicans on board with this. That's a positive note. Also, just listening to all the poppycock from the left and from the Democrats all week about the tax reform plan, and they focus on the cut in rates for pass-through entities. And as we both know, those are entrepreneurs and those are mom-and-pop businesses who will benefit from that corporate tax cut. But the Democrats are messaging it as if it's that the rich are going to take advantage of that. And we've heard that time and again. I want to hear some pushback on the right from Republicans on that very note, because again, that's what has been promised to small business owners for literally decades and has never been delivered to them.
Maria, I was going to say, I think what the stock market is doing right now is really important. They are sending a signal that investors believe that this was a step in the direction of actually getting something done. There's been a lot of skepticism.
$5.33 trillion in market value created since Election Day.
And a new record. We were talking on Tuesday about, are we going to get over 23,000? Well, now we're well over 23,000 on the Dow. You know, there's a lot of skepticism in this town about whether Republicans can get anything done over on Capitol Hill. And what the market is saying, they actually think that this was a real step towards getting some kind of tax overhaul finished.
I think you're right.
To Dagan's point, over half of business income is taxed on individual returns as pass-through income. If you don't do that reform, it's not tax reform. Yeah, you do the corporate piece, but if you leave that sitting over there, you have left half of it on the table, and you're not going to get the growth that you need. So you really have to do both.
And we knew that the left was going to have this, you know, it's all for the rich. That's the talking point. We knew it. Once again, though, the right is constantly getting bullied over these talking points. If the highest earners are paying, if the top 10% earners are paying 80% of the tax, if you're not impacting that group, you're not cutting taxes.
It's really simple. That argument is a big argument for the status quo. So if you want to vote for the status quo, fine, but that means no real income growth for the middle class, all our offshore earnings parked in other countries, all our innovation parked in Ireland, all of our headquarters heading overseas.
Right.
If that's the vote you want to take, fine, but that's not the vote I want.
What you're saying is really important. I mean, General, we've been talking for a year now about the preparedness or lack of our military. And the sequester obviously killed it. And for a long time, President Trump has been saying President Obama underfunded the defense system.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And remember, so our audience understands, the sequester was a combination of a presidential initiative, Obama's, and a Republican Congress that went along with it. And it clearly has decimated the military. And the accidents that we're seeing are a direct result of lack of congressional funding. The military, and you take a look at any service out there, we've just shrunk too small to be able to meet the everyday requirements we have. And then if you have less people to meet the requirements, they're doing more, and that's what produces the accidents and mishaps that we have.
Real quick, Maya McGinnis from the Committee for a Responsible Budget is out this morning saying this is irresponsible, saying that we're adding to the debt. What's the pushback, Doug?
The big problems in the budget are on the spending side. They are the need for real entitlement reform that makes those programs sustainable.
Right.
I don't think you'll do that in an economy that's not growing. So let's get the growth and, yes, take on those programs.
Yeah, it's because that conversation is gone, right, John? Dagan, you've brought this conversation up time and time again. I don't hear this conversation happening as much. That is, where is the spending cuts, and how do you draw in and take a look at the debt over the long term? How do you control spending?
You control spending, Doug, by fixing Social Security, fixing Medicaid, which the Republicans actually tried to do, fixing Medicare, and controlling the interest on the debt. 80% of the growth in our federal spending in the next decade is going to be from Social Security, health care programs, and interest on the debt.
And this, you have to say, this is something else you can challenge the president on, because this is where the president has drawn a line in the sand. He said he's not going to touch Social Security and not going to touch Medicare, so it's tougher to hit those spending pieces. The other point I wanted to throw out to both you and Doug is, so Republicans get challenged on the wealthy versus middle class issue. I think the area where they need to be challenged is on the growth issue. Can this tax overhaul really get us from a 2% growth rate to 3% growth? Doug, I don't know if you have any views.
You need a half a percentage point. You don't need a full percentage point. If you get a half a percentage point in better growth, this all adds up. It's fine. And we need the half a percentage point. We really do.
And Stephen Mnuchin has been saying that's how you pay for it, partly by actually generating economic activity and growth. Doug, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, Douglas Holtz-Eakin there.